An accidental proposal to an alien princess? One human's life just changed forever. The trinket. Jake Donovan wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, squinting at the perpetual twilight beyond the observation deck of Crossroads Station. The massive structure orbited Nexus Prime, a neutral trade world where species from across the galaxy converged to do business. As one of the station's senior mechanics, Jake kept the life support systems humming and the gravity generators stable. But after 3 years of the same routine, he felt like just another cog in the cosmic machinery. Another thrilling day in paradise, he muttered, checking his chronometer. His shift had ended an hour ago, but the ventilation system in Sector 7 had been acting up again. The Zalakians who lived there breathed methane, and a malfunction could kill them in minutes. The repair took longer than expected. By the time Jake made it to the nebula's edge, the station's most popular cantina, the evening crowd was already deep into their drinks. The establishment buzzed with a dozen different languages, the air thick with exotic scents, and the blue glow of the massive viewport that showed Nexus Prime's swirling storm systems. Jake ordered his usual synthetic whiskey that almost tasted like the real thing and scanned the room. Traders, diplomats, and spacers of every conceivable species mingled at tables or stood clustered around the holographic news displays. In one corner, a Thraxian merchant named Vexstar was hawking trinkets to anyone who'd listen. Ancient artifacts. Vexstar's voice carried over the ambient noise, his forearms gesturing dramatically. Relics from the old kingdoms, each piece tells a story of love, war, and destiny. Jake snorted. Vexstar was known for his creative marketing, usually selling mass-produced junk with fabricated histories. But boredom and curiosity got the better of him. He wandered over to the merchant's display, where various baubles and ornaments glinted under the cantina's lights. Jake Donovan. Vexstar's compound eyes fixed on him. Perfect timing. My friend, I have something special today, something that calls to the romantic soul. I doubt that, Jake replied, but he found himself examining the wares anyway. Most were obviously fake, but one piece caught his attention. It was a pendant of some kind, crafted from a deep blue metal that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Intricate patterns were etched into its surface, forming symbols that hurt to look at directly. That one, Vexstar said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, is from the Zephyrian Empire. A courting token, used by their nobility to declare intentions of marriage. Very old, very powerful. For you, only 500 credits. 500? Jake nearly choked on his drink. For a piece of costume jewelry? Costume jewelry? Vexstar looked genuinely offended. My friend, this is a genuine article. Feel it, the weight. The craftsmanship. The Zephyrians don't make trinkets. Despite himself, Jake picked up the pendant. It was surprisingly heavy, and the metal felt warm against his palm. The symbols seemed to pulse with an inner light, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard distant music, a haunting melody that spoke of vast skies and soaring cities. 200, Jake said, surprised by his own words. 400, and I'm robbing myself. 250, final offer. Vexstar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You drive a hard bargain, human. But I like you, so yes, 250 credits, and may it bring you the love you seek. Jake transferred the credits, still not sure why he was buying the thing. Maybe it was the loneliness talking, or maybe he just needed something to break the monotony. He slipped the pendant into his jacket pocket and returned to the bar, ordering another drink. That's when he saw her. She stood near the viewport, tall and elegant, her skin a pale silver that seemed to glow in the starlight. Her hair was white, as cosmic dust, flowing down her back like a waterfall, and her eyes were the color of nebulae, deep purple shot through with silver. She wore simple clothes, but they couldn't hide her natural grace. Everything about her suggested nobility, from her perfect posture to the way other patrons gave her a respectful berth. Jake had seen plenty of alien species during his time on Crossroads Station, but none had ever affected him like this. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, and when she turned slightly, catching his stare, he felt his heart skip. Before he could lose his nerve, Jake walked over, his hand instinctively reaching for the pendant in his pocket. the acceptance excuse. Me, Jake said, his voice slightly hoarse. I don't mean to bother you, but I couldn't help noticing. He trailed off, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must sound. The woman turned fully to face him, and Jake felt his breath catch. Up close, her alien beauty was even more striking. Her features were sharp and angular, but softened by an underlying warmth when she spoke. Her voice had a musical quality that made his skin tingle. Yes, she said, tilting her head slightly. You wish to speak with me? Yeah, I guess I do. Jake fumbled for words, acutely aware of his grease-stained work clothes and rough hands. I'm Jake. By the way, Jake Donovan. I work here on the station. I am Zarathine, she replied, offering what might have been a smile. It is pleasant to meet you, Jake Donovan. Zarathine, he repeated, loving the way her name rolled off his tongue. That's beautiful. Is it Zephyrian? Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You know of my people, a little, Jake admitted, then felt compelled to honesty. Actually, I just learned about them from a merchant selling trinkets. He said they were a noble race with a powerful empire. Zarathine said softly. Yes, that is accurate. An awkward silence stretched between them. Jake cursed himself for bringing up what was obviously a sensitive topic. He was about to apologize when he remembered the pendant in his pocket. Maybe it would serve as a conversation starter or at least a peace offering. Actually, he said, pulling out the blue pendant, I bought this. The merchant said it was Zephyrian. I thought you might find it interesting. The moment Zarathine saw the pendant, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes widened, and she took a sharp breath. The casual grace she'd maintained vanished, replaced by something that looked like shock, or perhaps reverence. Where did you acquire this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. From Vexstar, over there, Jake said, pointing to the merchant's stall. He said it was some kind of courting token. Look, if it's offensive or something. I didn't mean a courting token, Zarathine repeated, staring at the pendant with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. Yes, that is what it is. Jake held it out to her. Would you like to see it? I mean, you'd probably know more about it than I would. For a long moment, Zarathine simply stared at the pendant. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it from his hands. The moment her fingers touched the metal, it began to glow with an inner light, the symbols dancing and shifting across its surface. It responds to you, Jake said in wonder. I knew it was special. Zarathine looked up at him, and Jake was surprised to see tears in her eyes. You offer this to me? Sure, Jake said, misunderstanding her question. I mean, it's obviously meant for someone like you, someone who appreciates its history and significance. Consider it a gift. From one spacer to another, a gift, she whispered, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. You give this freely, knowing what it represents, of course, Jake said, warming to the idea. I bought it on impulse anyway. It should be with someone who understands its value. Zarathine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a resolve there that hadn't been before. Then I accept. The moment she spoke those words, every communication device in the cantina went silent. The holographic displays flickered and died. The ambient chatter of universal translators ceased, leaving only the sound of confused voices speaking in dozens of different languages. That's weird, Jake said, looking around at the chaos. Security officers were already moving through the crowd, checking their equipment. Must be some kind of interference. But Zarathine wasn't paying attention to the technical malfunction. She was staring at the pendant in her hands, which now pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. When she looked at Jake again, her expression was complex, grateful, fearful, and something else he couldn't identify. Jake Donovan, she said formally, you have given me a great honor, one that I pray you will not come to regret. Before he could ask what she meant, a commotion erupted near the cantina's entrance. A group of figures in elaborate armor pushed through the crowd, their movements sharp and purposeful. They wore the same silver coloring as Zarathine, but their faces were hard and unforgiving. Princess Kalthira, one of them called out, his voice carrying easily over the noise. By the ancient codes, we command you to present yourself. Jake felt his stomach drop. Princess? He looked at Zarathi, nor rather, Calthera, with new understanding. She wasn't just some noble traveler. She was royalty. I must go, she said quietly, slipping the pendant into her robes. But this conversation is not over, Jake Donovan. Far from it. She turned to face the approaching guards, her entire bearing transforming once again. Gone was the soft-spoken woman he'd been talking to. In her place stood a figure of unmistakable authority, someone born to command. Jake watched her go, his mind reeling. What had he just gotten himself into? The revelation. Next morning, Jake woke to find his quarters surrounded by Zephyrian guards. They weren't threatening, at least. Not overtly, but their presence made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. The lead guard, a stern-faced woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms, informed him that he was requested at the Zephyrian embassy. Requested, Jake repeated, pulling on his clothes. That's a nice way of saying summoned under armed escort. The guard's expression didn't change. Her Highness Princess Calthera wishes to speak with you regarding a matter of great importance. The embassy occupied an entire section of the station's diplomatic quarter, its corridors lined with flowing tapestries that depicted soaring cities and vast mountain ranges. Jake had never seen architecture quite like it. Everything curved and flowed, as if the builders had been trying to capture the essence of wind itself. He was led to a reception chamber where Calthera waited, no longer disguised as a simple traveler. She wore robes of deep blue and silver, her hair braided with threads of precious metal. A crown of delicate metalwork rested on her brow, but it was her eyes that held his attention. They were filled with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. Jake, she said, rising from her chair. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? He asked, trying to keep his tone light despite the circumstances. No, she admitted. I am afraid you did not. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Jake took the offered chair, noting that the guards remained at their posts by the door. So, Your Highness, he said, putting slight emphasis on the title, care to explain what's going on? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like buying. That pendant was the worst decision I've ever made. Calthera winced. The fault is mine, not yours. I should have stopped you the moment I saw what you carried, but she paused, gathering her thoughts. I have been alone for so long, Jake. When you offered the Heartstone so freely, with such genuine kindness, I allowed myself to hope for something that was never meant to be. Heartstone, Jake frowned. Is that what the pendant is called? Among other names, to my people, it is one of the most sacred artifacts in existence. It was crafted by the first Zephyrian rulers as a symbol of eternal commitment. When offered and accepted, it creates a bond that cannot be broken. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You're saying that when I gave it to you, and you accepted it, we became betrothed, Calthera finished quietly. By the ancient codes that govern my people, we are now promised to one another. The ceremony merely awaits our convenience. Jake stared at her, his mind struggling to process the information. But that's insane. I didn't know what it meant. It was just a gift between strangers. I know, she said, and the pain in her voice was evident. But my people do not recognize the concept of accidental proposals to them. The offering of a Heartstone is the most serious commitment one can make. To refuse it now would dishonor my lineage and potentially start a war. A war. Jake's voice rose over a misunderstanding. The Zephyrian Empire is not what it once was, Calthera explained. We have lost much of our territory and influence over the past century. Many of my people see this as a sign of divine displeasure, a punishment for abandoning the old ways. Your proposal, coming from a human, has awakened factions that have been dormant for years. As if summoned by her words, the chamber doors opened to admit a new group of Zephyrians. These were clearly high-ranking officials, their robes more elaborate and their bearing more imperious. The leader, an elderly male with silver hair and eyes like winter storms, approached with the measured steps of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Princess, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, we must discuss this situation. High Counselor V. Exgen, Calthera replied, inclining her head slightly. I present Jake Donovan, my chosen mate. The words sent a shiver through Jake. and he could see their effect on the assembled councillors. Several exchanged meaningful looks, while others appeared openly skeptical. "Your Highness," the Exton said carefully, "while we respect your choice, the Council has concerns about the suitability of this union. Mr. Donovan is not of noble blood. He has no understanding of our ways, our history, our responsibilities. The Heartstone chose him," Calthera said firmly. "Or rather, he chose it. The ancient artifacts do not respond to the unworthy. Ancient artifacts can be fooled." Another councillor interjected, "particularly by those who would exploit our princess for political gain." Jake had heard enough. He stood, ignoring the way the guards tensed. "Hold on just a minute. I didn't exploit anyone, and I sure as hell didn't ask for any of this. If your princess wants out of this engagement, she's got my full support." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the Exton spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "You would abandon your betrothed, bring shame upon the house of Theron Kai? I would free her from an obligation she never wanted." Jake shot back. "Isn't that what any decent person would do?" "Decent person," the Exton repeated, as if tasting something foul. "Human concepts of decency are not applicable here. You have made a sacred vow, whether you understood it or not. Honor demands that you fulfill it." Jake looked at Calthera, searching for some sign of what she truly wanted. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he caught something in her eyes, a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then you will be branded as an oath breaker," the Exton said. "The shame will follow you wherever you go. More importantly, the princess will be considered damaged goods, unsuitable for any future alliance. The political ramifications could be severe." Jake felt the trap closing around him. Whatever he chose, someone would suffer. But as he looked at Calthera's carefully composed face, he realized that his own feelings were becoming part of the equation. Despite the circumstances, despite the impossibility of the situation, he found himself genuinely caring about this alien princess, who had shown him such unexpected kindness. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked. "The bonding ceremony is scheduled for 3 days hence." The Exton replied, "That should give you sufficient time to prepare yourself." As the councillors filed out, leaving Jake alone with Calthera and her guards, he found himself wondering if 3 days would be nearly enough time to figure out how he felt about marrying an alien princess and whether she felt anything for him. Beyond resigned duty, the bond over the next 2 days, Jake found himself thrust into a crash course in Zephyrian culture and politics. Calthera had insisted on personally overseeing his education, much to the dismay of the High Council. They met in her private chambers, a suite of rooms that managed to be both luxurious and austere, decorated with flowing sculptures and star charts that mapped the former glory of the Zephyrian Empire. "Your people were explorers," Jake observed, studying a holographic display of their ancient territory. "You controlled systems across 3 sectors." "Were," Calthera confirmed, her finger tracing the boundaries of lost worlds. "The hegemony wars cost us dearly. We chose to fight for smaller nations rather than expand our own power. Many consider this a mistake." "I don't," Jake said quietly. "Protecting the weak takes more courage than conquering them." She looked at him with surprise. "You understand this? Even though it means you are marrying into a diminished house? Status doesn't mean much when you've spent your life keeping life support systems running." Jake replied, "I've learned that real strength comes from doing what's right, not what's profitable." Their eyes met across the star map, and Jake felt something shift between them. The formal distance that had characterized their interactions was giving way to something more genuine. Calthera moved closer, close enough that he could smell the exotic perfume she wore, something that reminded him of mountain air and distant storms. "Jake," she said softly, "you should know that this marriage need not be conventional. My people understand political unions. We could maintain separate quarters, separate lives. You would have the protection of my house, and I would have fulfilled my obligations. Is that what you want?" he asked. She hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Jake saw past the royal facade to the woman beneath. "What I want has never been relevant. I am the last of my line. My choices affect millions. That's not what I asked." Jake reached out, gently taking her hand. Her skin was warm, softer than it looked. Forget about obligations and politics for a minute. What do you want, Kalthira? She stared at their joined hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I want to not be alone anymore. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Jake felt his heart clench with unexpected emotion. He'd been lonely too, going through the motions of life without any real connection to another person. Maybe this wasn't the romance he'd dreamed of as a young man, but it felt more real than anything he'd experienced. Then maybe we can figure this out together, he said, before Kalthira could respond. Alarms began blaring throughout the embassy. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red, and the sound of running feet echoed in the corridors. Within seconds, the door burst open and Captain Nixara, the head of Kalthira's guard, rushed in. Your Highness, she said, breathing hard, we have a situation. 3 Mordic warships have just dropped out of hyperspace. They're demanding your immediate surrender. Kalthira was on her feet instantly, her royal training taking over. The Mordic here? What do they want with me? They claim you are betrothed to Prince Garacter, heir to the Mordic throne. They say the engagement was arranged by your father before his death, and that your current situation violates the treaty. Jake felt his blood run cold. There's another engagement. It's complicated, Kalthira said, her face pale. The Mordic have been pushing for an alliance for years. My father always refused, but she trailed off, realization dawning in her eyes. But if I am considered dishonored by my own people, if the council decides I am unfit to rule, they could claim the treaty was activated by default. Nixara finished grimly. Your Highness, we need to get you off the station. Now, no. Kalthira's voice was firm. I will not run from this. Send word to the Mordic ships that I will meet with their representatives in 1 hour. Your Highness, that's extremely dangerous. The Mordic are not known for their diplomatic restraint. Nevertheless, it must be done. Kalthira turned to Jake, her expression resolute. I release you from our engagement. This is no longer your burden to bear. Like hell, Jake said, surprising himself with his vehemence. You said yourself that backing out now would dishonor you. I won't be responsible for that, Jake. You don't understand. The Mordic are warriors. Prince Garacter has challenged dozens of suitors to combat. He's never lost. Then I guess I'll have to be the first. Kalthira stared at him in shock. You would fight for me. You barely know me. Jake took her hands in his, acutely aware that this might be the last quiet moment they'd have. Maybe not, but I know enough. I know you care more about your people than yourself. I know you've been carrying the weight of an empire on your shoulders since you were probably too young to understand what that meant. And I know that when you smile, really smile. Not that diplomatic thing you do for the council. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Tears gathered in her eyes. You could die. We could all die. But at least we'll face it together. The moment was broken by another urgent communication from the bridge. The Mordic ships were moving into attack formation, their weapons systems powering up. They had minutes before the situation escalated beyond diplomacy. So, Jake said, trying to inject some levity into the situation, what's the protocol for challenging an alien prince to combat? Despite everything, Kalthira almost smiled. You really are insane, aren't you? Completely. Is that a problem? She reached up and touched his face gently. No, she said softly. I think it might be exactly what I need. As they prepared to face the Mordic delegation, Jake found himself thinking that maybe buying that pendant hadn't been such a bad decision after all, even if it got him killed. The choicest meeting took place in the station's main conference chamber, a neutral space designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. The Mordic delegation arrived in full ceremonial armor, their reptilian features made even more intimidating by the ritual scarification that covered their scaled skin. Prince Garacter towered over even the tallest humans, his presence radiating barely contained violence. Jake sat beside Kalthira at the diplomatic table, acutely aware that he was the only person in the room not wearing some form of armor or ceremonial robes. His simple work clothes felt inadequate, but Kalthira had insisted that he dress as himself, the man who had unknowingly proposed to a princess, Princess Kalthira. Garacter's voice was like gravel in a cement mixer. you stand accused of violating the Compact of Swords signed by your father and mine. The treaty clearly states that in the event of political instability within the Zephyrian Empire, our houses would be joined to ensure mutual protection. High Counselor V. Exgen leaned forward. Your Highness, the compact was never ratified by the full council. Your claim has no legal standing. Legal standing. Garacter's laugh was harsh. The Mordic do not hide behind legal technicalities. Honor demands satisfaction. I claim the princess as mine by right of first treaty. She's already promised to another, Jake said quietly. Every head in the room turned toward him, and he felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. The Heartstone has been given and accepted. Your claim comes second. Garacter's eyes fixed on Jake with predatory interest. You are the human who dares to claim what is mine? I'm the human who was chosen by the woman you're trying to kidnap, Jake replied, grateful that his voice remained steady. Chosen. Garacter's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. By accident, I am told. A mistake born of ignorance. Maybe it started as an accident, Jake admitted. But it's not a mistake anymore. The prince studied him for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed a sound like breaking glass. Very well, human. You amuse me. I will give you the honor of single combat. When you fall, the princess will come to me willingly, knowing that her champion was defeated in fair battle. And if I win, Jake asked. You will not, Garacter said. Simply, but if, by some miracle, you do, the Mordic will withdraw our claim and trouble the princess no more. Calthera started to protest, but Jake cut her off with a gentle touch on her arm. I accept. The combat took place in the station's cargo bay, hastily converted into an arena. Word had spread quickly through Crossroads Station, and aliens of every description crowded the observation galleries. Jake had never felt so exposed. Standing in the center of the makeshift ring in borrowed armor that didn't quite fit, Garacter entered from the opposite side, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. His weapon of choice was a massive, two-handed sword that looked like it could cleave a man in half. Jake had opted for a more practical approach, a plasma rifle and backup sidearm, the weapons he'd trained with during his mandatory service years. Weapons at range, the referee announced. Combat continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue. Jake raised his rifle, knowing he'd only get one good shot. Before Garacter closed the distance, the prince was faster than anything that size had a right to be, but Jake had spent years working in cramped spaces with malfunctioning equipment. He knew how to make quick decisions under pressure. The starting signal echoed through the bay, and Garacter charged. Jake's first shot took the prince in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not dropping him. His second shot went wide as he rolled to avoid a sword strike that would have taken his head off. What followed was a desperate game of cat and mouse, with Jake using every piece of cover in the bay, while Garacter systematically destroyed his hiding spots. The prince's armor absorbed most of the plasma bursts, but Jake could see he was slowing down. The shoulder wound affecting his balance. Finally, back into a corner with nowhere else to run, Jake made a desperate gamble. Instead of trying to dodge the prince's final charge, he dropped to one knee and aimed for the one weak spot he'd identified, a gap in the armor, where the helm met the neck guard. The shot was perfect. Garacter stumbled, his sword clattering to the deck as he fell to his knees. For a moment, the only sound in the bay was the prince's labored breathing. Yield, Jake said, his rifle still trained on the fallen warrior. Garacter looked up at him, and Jake was surprised to see something like respect in those reptilian eyes. You fight with honor, human. I yield. The crowd erupted in cheers and confused chatter. Jake lowered his weapon, suddenly aware that he was shaking from adrenaline. He'd done it. Somehow. Impossibly, he'd won. Calthera was beside him in an instant, her careful composure finally cracking. You magnificent fool, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You could have been killed, but I wasn't, Jake replied, pulling her into his arms. And now we have a choice, a real choice. As they held each other in the center of the arena, surrounded by cheering aliens and the debris of their battle, Jake realized that his life had indeed changed forever. But maybe, just maybe, it had changed for the better. The wedding ceremony took place a week later, conducted according to ancient Zephyrian traditions under the light of Nexus Prime's triple moons. Jake wore the formal robes of a Zephyrian prince consort, though he'd insisted on keeping his work boots, a small rebellion that made Kalthira smile. As they exchanged vows in the flowing language of her people, Jake thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them together. A chance encounter, a misunderstood gift, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. "Do you regret it?" Kalthira asked later, as they stood on the observation deck of their new ship, watching the stars wheel by. "Which part?" Jake replied, "Buying a trinket from a sketchy merchant, accidentally proposing to an alien princess, fighting a 7-foot lizard warrior in single combat. All of it." Jake considered the question seriously. His old life was gone, the quiet routine, the predictable days, the lonely nights. In its place was uncertainty, adventure, and a partnership with someone who challenged him to be better than he'd ever thought possible. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret any of it, do you?" Kalthira leaned against his shoulder, her silver hair catching the starlight. "Ask me again in 50 years. Jake smiled, thinking that 50 years with this remarkable woman might not be nearly enough, but it would be a good start. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward the Zephyrian homeworld and whatever challenges awaited them there, Jake reflected on the truth he'd learned. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, even from a trinket bought on impulse in a space station bar. Sometimes accidents change everything for the better.